We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hey everybody, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 17, Mork Goes Irk. This first aired on February 8th, 1979. The IMDb synopsis is, Mork decides to leave the planet. Meanwhile, Susan convinces Mork, Mindy, and Mr. Bickley to see a lecherous motivational speaker. And I'll just say right now, he's not lecherous. This was directed by Howard Storm, his 11th of 59 Mork and Mindy episodes. It's the last of 4 co-written by Lloyd Turner and Gordon Mitchell. This episode sees the return of Mr. Bickley, and they had written the introduction of Mr. Bickley. This episode also is the last to feature Morgan Fairchild as Susan Taylor, and it's particularly notable for the guest appearance of David Letterman, who was then 31 years old. He had done a couple variety shows, including one Mary Tyler Moore variety show, and then he would go on to the Mary Tyler Moore Hour. He's playing the motivational speaker whose name is Ellsworth. We get the snow-covered exterior of the house with that orange car. Mork is at the table and he's eating breakfast with a chimpanzee who's wearing rainbow suspenders, much like Mork's own. Mork says, "How about that new pope?" And of course there had been an earlier reference to the pope being Polish. This is the same pope, John Paul II. Mork tells a King Kong joke, and the monkey seems unimpressed, so Mork says that the joke kind of bit the big one. Mindy comes in and is understandably startled. Mork introduces the chimpanzee as O'Keefe. I don't know for sure, but my guess is that this is a joke on associate producer James O'Keefe. Mindy apparently knew that Mork was going to invite a friend over for breakfast, but he didn't tell her that the friend was a chimpanzee. Mork says that the chimp is a con and a fugitive from the zoo. Mork was up in a tree observing bald spots in human beings, and he had counted up to 85 men. I don't know if Fred was one of them, but of course Fred has more than just a bald spot. Mork realized that something hairy was watching him. He brought the chimp back to cheer Mindy up, and he doesn't want to send him back to the big house with those rotten screws. The chimp makes gestures of refusal when Mindy says that he's got to go back to the zoo. Mork says no way, they'd put him on banana bread and water and take away his tire. It's a jungle in there. Mindy disagrees, and she says at the zoo, animals get food, protection, and love. Also, if the chimp is running around free, he might hurt himself. Mork calls Mindy the warden, and he tells O'Keefe that he's got to go back to his cell. He leads the chimp over to the stairs and tells him to start packing. He does say that he will arrange conjugal visits with Cheetah, and he'll get him a banana with a file in it. And I have to point out that Cheetah was a male chimpanzee. So not only is it a suggestive joke, it's a gay suggestive joke.
But look at this, Mindy. He taught me a dance. It's a funky monkey hustle. Watch. Come on now. Come on, Mindy. Don't be afraid. Come on, don't be afraid.
Mindy says that Mork has been acting awfully strange lately, more strange than usual. Yesterday, he spent all day walking and talking backwards. And I thought that was interesting that they chose not to show that. They just referred to it. Mork says that that's all behind him now. Today, he's going to buy 400 balloons, a tank of nitrous oxide, and some calf's liver. And I didn't know if that was a callback to when Eugene spat out his liver at the dinner table. Mork is doing all this crazy stuff because he's trying to cheer Mindy up. She says she's not sad. He says she will be after she hears the news he has to tell her. He has orders from Orson. He's going to be transferred to another planet, and he'll never ever see her again.
What?
Well, you've got to look at the good side. You're not losing an alien. You're gaining an empty room.
We get that snow-covered exterior of the Boulder Mall. This is the first scene with Mr. Bickley and Fred. They would develop an interesting eventual friendship, the two middle-aged male regulars, but this is the first time they interact, and it turns out that Fred actually doesn't know that this is Mr. Bickley. Mr. Bickley is holding Cora's coffee cup, And this is another episode where Elizabeth Kerr is absent, and they don't even refer to Cora otherwise. I don't think she would like a customer, particularly Mr. Bickley, using her coffee cup, but Fred doesn't object to that. Fred is selling Mr. Bickley some headphones. Mr. Bickley says he'll take them, and he pulls out the cord. Fred tells him that he won't be able to hear. Mr. Bickley just wants headphones to keep noise out. He puts them on, and so he doesn't hear when Fred says the headphones will cost $50. This would be about $200 in current money, and it seems really high for headphones, although I'm guessing that that was probably average for the late 70s. Fred repeats the price when Mr. Bickley takes the headphones off. Mr. Bickley asks if Fred will accept a check, and Fred says sure, so Mr. Bickley tells him to get the check from Fred's daughter. Mr. Bickley says he lives underneath Fred's daughter, and he works at home writing greeting cards, so that's a little reminder of who he is, just in case nobody saw the Mr. Bickley introduction. Fred, of course, remembers Mindy telling him about her new neighbor, and he thinks that his name is Buckley, so Mr. Bickley corrects that. Mr. Bickley says he can't write sympathy cards when Mindy is crying all morning, and of course he offers her no sympathy. Mindy comes in and she's very upset. Mr. Bickley puts the headphones back on again. Mindy tells Fred about Mork, and he says he's sorry, and he gives her a quick hug. And so this is part of the evolution of Fred in the first season, where gradually he becomes fond of Mork and accepts Mork's role in Mindy's life. Mindy tells her father that Mork is leaving in a couple days, and she says Mork is just about her best friend, which I thought was odd phrasing because in previous episodes he's just simply her best friend, but maybe talking to her father she phrases it differently. Mr. Bickley brings out another one of those little booze bottles like they used to have on airplanes, and he pours some into Cora's cup. He says he's glad he can't read lips. Then Susan comes in, and she's again wearing a very long fur coat. She says she was across the street at the jewelry store buying herself a numero uno charm. So we're getting another sense of the layout at the Boulder Mall, although I don't know if it's consistent. Susan sees that Mindy is depressed, and Fred tells her that it's for personal reasons because, of course, they're not going to tell Susan that Mork is being transferred to another planet. And Mr. Bickley doesn't know because he was wearing the headphones, but he's now taken them off. Susan says she used to get emotional ups and downs over the least little thing. Then she found ERC, which stands for Ellsworth Revitalization Conditioning. Mr. Bickley points out that conditioning starts with a C, but Susan says that Ellsworth says its spelling is just another hang-up. She invites Mindy to try ERC, but Mindy doesn't feel up to it today. Mr. Bickley actually gets a little bit flirty with Susan, and he suggests Susan grab a cup and split his lunch, meaning the booze. She tells him, "Thanks, but I'm not into tiny cocktails." She says that Ellsworth teaches you how to love yourself. Mr. Bickley says, "I bet you got an A," and the audience applauds, and she says that she got an A+. Then she says ta-ta, and she exits. We get an evening or nighttime exterior of Mork and Mindy's house. Mindy is on the couch when Mork comes home. He wants her to guess what's in the paper bag he's holding, but she doesn't feel like it.
Okay, I'll guess it for you myself. Time to play What's My Bag?
Mystery object. Are you a shovel?
No.
Are you a sitting-on joke book? I give up. Well, I guess I'll have to tell myself.
And to present the prize, our lovely prize girl, Lola.
Thank you, Otto.
Guess what it is, Mindy? It's a going-away present for Mindy, and it's an exciting new gift I got this morning on the street corner. It's Zen-O-Matic.
It's a what?
It's Zen-O-Matic, that exciting new kitchen tool that does absolutely nothing. That's right, it can't dice, it can't peel, it can't chop. And it won't even make julienne fries, whatever those are. That's right, Zen-O-Matic does diddly for you. Yes, an exciting new kitchen tool from the people who brought you frozen sand and electric toothpaste. Send absolutely nothing today to Buddha Productions, care of Nevada, box Get one today.
Mindy says she appreciates what Mork is trying to do, but she's just not in the mood. Mork tells her that she doesn't have to be sad on account of him. She says how can she help it? He's being sent off to a remote corner of the universe, and she doesn't even know where. He says it's not that far, just the other side of the universe. It's in the Sigma 7 galaxy, a troubled place called something like Suros. He says the people there are not very friendly, but they're tiny, so even in their most vicious mood, you could only get bit below the ankle. She really wants to talk to Orson and says that she's not afraid of him. She asks him to plug her into his, Mork's head, so she can talk to that fat fascist. We will have at least one episode where Mindy does go inside Mork's mind, but I believe that's more like season 2 or 3. Mork says he talked to Orson this afternoon.
Mindy, I've been thinking this over a lot, and I don't think I'm very much good for you. You know, I do silly things. I make weird objects. I talk to furniture and leave you out of the conversation. I'm always getting in the way. I bring home strange people.
I see. Orson wouldn't change his mind.
Oh, no, I talked to Orson for a real long time, and he said I can stay on Earth as long as I want.
He did? That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's nice to have a choice. And I chose to leave.
When we come back from the commercial break, it seems to just be a few minutes later, but for some reason the exterior of the house is now in daylight, so a little screw up there. But they're in the same outfits. Mindy asks why he has to leave, and she asks if he's unhappy. Was it something that she did? He says it's because she has emotions. One day he really will have to leave the Earth, and it'll hurt her very much. He's only been in her life a few months, and look how she feels now.
Imagine what it'll be like after 10 years. The longer I stay, the harder it'll be for you.
But what about you?
Me? The cosmic Charles Bronson? I don't have a heart. It won't be a problem for me.
It's a problem for me. I've got a big adjustment to make. Getting used to no Mork.
I know what I can do. Get O'Keefe out on parole. It'll be almost like having me around.
It'll be a lot like having you around.
Oh, what a nice thing to say.
And I just want to point out that they are touching each other's legs lightly, so there's an intimacy here, not just verbally. It's Mr. Bickley at the door, and he wants to talk to Miss McConnell. She angrily tells him that they're not making any noise, and they're not doing anything. He says he knows that, but he was downstairs feeling depressed, and he came up to share it with them. So I guess it's sort of a misery loves company kind of thing. Mork calls him Mr. Prickly, and Bickley corrects him. Mindy says she's sorry to be rude, but she's very upset because Mork is leaving town. Mr. Bickley says Mork is just going out of town while Mr. Bickley is going out of business. He used to be the best greeting card writer, but he can't work anymore. He admits he was blaming this on them, and he says he lost it. Mork says they can find a posse and find it. Mr. Bickley says that sympathy is the first thing to go. He used to be able to get tears out of a coat rack.
Not anymore. Listen to this. Your pet rabbit died. Poor little Muffet. Your two choices are eat it or stuff it.
Mork says that the card is sad. Mindy says that this is just a writer's slump. Mork is leaving for good. Mr. Bickley says, Sister, little Muffet isn't coming back either. None of them has a reason to be happy now. And Mr. Bickley says he'll drink to that, and he's taking booze out of Mindy's little fridge. Susan lets herself in, saying, knock, knock.
Well, what a group. Hear no evil, see no evil, and feel no pain. What's wrong with you people?
I've lost my talent.
Mork is leaving.
The rabbit died.
I like how Mork gets away with the rabbit died joke, and everybody plays it as deadpan as they can. The thing about the rabbit dying, can't remember if I covered this on another episode. The rabbit would always die in those kind of pregnancy tests, but it was a shorthand for a pregnancy test. And in fact, the movie Rabbit Test, directed by Joan Rivers and starring Billy Crystal as the world's first pregnant man, had come out in 1978. And yes, Robin Williams and Billy Crystal were very good friends. I can't remember if they'd met at that point. Susan says they can all sit around being depressed, or they can be straightened out by one little thing. And Mork guesses Paul Williams, referring to the diminutive composer and musician who was quite prominent in the 1970s. Susan says, "You people have to get irk." And Mr. Bickley says that Susan has been irking him since she came in. Susan thinks irk would help Mindy with depression, and Mr. Bickley needs help with his drinking. He says he drinks fine by himself. Susan says Ellsworth could come up with something for Mork, so apparently he provides cures even when there's not a problem. Mork says, "Come on, Mindy, let's not poop the party." And he thinks that Ellsworth might be able to help both of them, and he doesn't want to leave her like this, all depressed because he's going. Susan says she's not taking no for an answer, and she's going to sit there until they all agree, including Mr. Hickle, so then he corrects her. We get an exterior of Susan's apartment building. Then we see the interior, and I felt like it looked different. I don't know if it was the layout or the decorations. I'll have to double check the first Susan episode. We can see a banner that says Ellsworth Revitalization Conditioning. And I counted at least 18 people in the room, not counting Ellsworth himself, and he'll shortly say that there are 20. So that's believable, especially because we are not seeing the fourth wall. And yes, there's David Letterman as Ellsworth, and he's wearing a brown leisure suit. But they didn't go too far in the direction of sleazing him up in his appearance. I noticed that Susan's outfit was relatively understated, especially since she's hosting this session. Mork is in his usual clothes. Mr. Bickley has an overcoat and he's holding a thermos. I really liked Mindy's outfit. It's just a very nice turtleneck with a long dress over it, very 70s and very Mindy. Susan wants Ellsworth to meet two of her closest friends, so she has Mork and Mindy stand up. They offer their hands, Mindy to shake and Mork to do nanu nanu, but Ellsworth ignores them, so that's a hint that he is not a friendly guy. And Susan starts to gush about how wonderful Ellsworth is. He interrupts her to do a head count and is happy about all the checks he's received. He asks what Susan was saying, and Mork answers for her that an unselfish man like Ellsworth came all this way for a little thing like money. It's 8 o'clock, so it's time to begin, and Susan sits on the couch between Mindy and Mr. Bickley, and she's very excited. I think of all the Susan scenes, this is the one where she's most eager. Usually she's a bit more even-tempered. Susan says Ellsworth has something very important to say, so when he says hello, Mr. Bickley asks if that was it. Ellsworth calls them dipsticks and scuzz, and most of the people clap. Ellsworth rhetorically asks what they'll be doing here, so Susan eagerly raises her hand and gets called on. She stands up and says that they'll be trying to find their own space. He says that's very good, and the crowd claps again. Mork raises his hand and says he has a point of Ellsworth order. He says that Susan has her own space, since this is her apartment, and there's barely enough room for any of them.
That's a joke. You're out of order, pal.
But it's the reality.
Reality is nothing more than a concept.
Oh, but it's truth.
This is truth. Sit down and shut up.
Thank you.
Ellsworth says it's sharing time. They can say whatever's on their mind, and whatever they think will set them free. He calls on Susan, and she says she learned to accept how beautiful she is and how fun she is to be near. She just has to love herself as the rest of the world does. And the crowd claps. A heavy-set man with a beard and glasses stands up, and he says he's having trouble understanding any of this. Ellsworth tells him to sit down and shut up, and almost everyone claps. And of course, Mork and Mindy are not into this. Bickley has very fine Kentucky bourbon, and he'd like to share it with someone who has soda. And you can see Mindy just looks aghast by this. Ellsworth said that Bickley is new and he doesn't know about the agreement. This session can last up to 15 hours. There's no eating, but Bickley says who cares. There's no going to the bathroom, and Bickley says big deal. But when Ellsworth says no drinking, Bickley exits and says, "Wait till you try to cash my check." Ellsworth says that Irk is not a process, it's something that happens in space. In fact, it may be space.
It's definitely not space. Space is a continuum, an infinite... Wait, don't tell me. Sit down and shut up.
Mindy's item is she paid a lot of money to come here and learn something. Ellsworth looks amused. He says she's learned something already. She's been conned. She says that's terrible. And he says terrible is just a concept. She says anything he doesn't want to talk about is just a concept. He says, no, not my Rolls Royce. That's real. Mork has another point of order.
People don't come here for humiliation and abuse. Every creature in the universe is entitled to respect.
It's ridiculous. Nobody wants to hear that message. Sit down and shut up.
But you said to say what was on our mind.
Well, I've changed the rules.
Not before I get one more thing in. I think you should be honest with yourself. Like yourself. Trust yourself. Know yourself. That's all you ever need to know.
Oh, Mork, that's beautiful. Did Orson tell you that?
No, Leon Spinks.
He also says that not having bathroom breaks is something that he won't sit for. So he changes the rules, and half of the room exits for the bathroom. Ellsworth says if those people want to leave and drop out, that's fine. Ellsworth is still the winner. He gets to go home early, and he got their money, and he's got his Rolls Royce. And then he exits out the front door. There's silence until Susan says to Mindy, well, he's cute. And we already know Susan is a bad judge of men because of the story about her unseen lawyer boyfriend who is spending Christmas with his wife. Ellsworth quickly returns because his Rolls Royce has been stolen. Mork tells him losing your Rolls Royce is a concept, getting it back is a reality. The next scene is set during daytime again, and Mork is in the living room. He's wearing a spacesuit. He's saying goodbye to the plants and the sofa. He says, take it easy, chair. And then he's amused by himself. He says goodbye to the walls and the air, and then down to the electrons, protons, and nucleus. So it's like some sort of Orkin version of Goodnight Moon. Mindy comes in towards the end, and she says that before he finishes saying his goodbyes, which at this rate could be sometime around mid-September, she wants to talk to him. She's been observing him, like at the meeting last night. She tells him that he doesn't practice what he preaches. He says, Mayday, sense of verbal confusion. So a bit of that stage direction thing. And they sit down at the table. She says he may not have had emotions when he arrived, but he has them now. And he starts to get on the defensive, and he tells her, sit down and shut up, like Ellsworth would have. She says no one could have said all those wonderful things at the meeting last night without feeling them. She figured something else out. He's not leaving here because of her. He's leaving here because of him.
I'm not.
You're the one who won't be able to handle leaving if you stay much longer.
Me? Yeah. I don't want to go home. It's cold out there. Who else will let me do the things you do? I'm gonna miss you. I feel humiliation and guilt.
Oh, Mork, you don't have to feel guilty about having emotions.
Oh, yeah, Orson said emotions are bad for you. We'll never evolve if you have emotions.
Shh.
Boy, is he a nimble! I'm going upstairs to talk to Orson. I'm not leaving.
You're not?
No way! Boy, having feelings is good. I'm back, Jack!
For the tag, Mork calls Orson from the couch, but he's standing up in his head, and in fact a taxi goes by. Orson asks if he's ready to leave, and he's surprised that Mork has decided to stay. Mork calls him your girthness. He says he wants to continue his observation of emotions, especially guilt. He says guilt kind of mischievously. And even though you would think that Orson would know about emotions because he's enforcing Mork not giving into emotions, he still is curious about Earth emotions, and he asks if all Earthlings have them. Mork says everyone but a few presidents.
What are presidents?
Well, they're elected officials who are sent to Washington every 4 years to bring the country to financial ruin, recognize Chinese, and throw a baseball out once every spring.
Is that all?
Well, I've also observed that they never tell a lie, but then again, they never tell the truth. It's something called politics. And they also have a power that's feared very much by everyone called veto.
What's that?
I'm not sure, but I think it's an Italian bodyguard.
Sounds dull.
Oh, no, sir. The big bucks comes when you get to be an ex-president. Then publishers pay you millions of dollars to write things called memoirs. But the strange part is, they don't have very good memories. And the really funny part is, no one buys those books.
So this transparently is mostly about Nixon, although I suppose it could apply to other presidents of that time. He says, "That's all she wrote, your fat ship." And they pronounce his Nanu Nanu a bit differently. It's like Nanu Nanu. I think sometimes it's Nanu Nanu, but just that caught my ear, that pronunciation this time. So I found this episode uneven. It's definitely an interesting episode, definitely worth tuning into, but I wasn't sure how all the pieces fit together, because you've got the thread with Susan and Ellsworth, and then you've got Mork leaving and the impact this has on Mindy and him, and then to a lesser degree Fred, and then Mr. Bickley is put into the mix, and almost feels like that was something where they realized that they had this great new character and they wanted to not quite shoehorn him in, but kind of nudge him into it. And I'm not sure that all those pieces come together. There's actually so much going on this episode that I'm not even going to really spend any time talking about the fact that Mork brings home a chimpanzee and it doesn't really impact the plot. It just is something that happens in the first few minutes of the episode. In contrast, there is a whole season 3 episode about a similar plot, and so I will leave my observations about chimpanzees in movies and television for that time. I did think it was fun to see the various characters interact, the regulars as well as the less regulars with Mr. Bickley and Susan, and of course David Letterman. An interesting performance. I did like seeing him and Robin Williams bounce off of each other. They have very different personae. And you would eventually see this when David Letterman got his own talk show, and Robin Williams would be a frequent guest, and they became good friends. You have that David Letterman kind of smarminess and sarcasm playing against Robin Williams in his more pure, innocent, good-hearted mode. And so that's nice. The lecherous adjective is so bizarre, but IMDb has these odd descriptions. I would have chosen greedy or unsympathetic or something along those lines. And that was interesting that Ellsworth admits that he's a con artist. There's an odd thing about Mork and Mindy where even the people who are unethical will tell you that they're unethical. There's not really any kind of great conning going on. Even in Mork the Gullible, it turned out that you knew who was lying and who wasn't. Maybe it's because this show was to some degree aimed at kids, but I thought that was odd. If Ellsworth's trying to build a following, is he just going from town to town and figuring that word of mouth won't affect his reputation? Like, why not just reel off a bunch of nonsense and not admit that it's nonsense? So that was odd. I felt like David Letterman did what the role needed to do. I would have liked to seen a bit more. It's still fun. It's always fun to watch this episode and go, oh my gosh, relatively young David Letterman. And to put him into that mix of characters. We still have Mr. Bickley with a drinking problem, being an unsympathetic character to some degree, though like I said in his earlier episode, even the curmudgeons on Mork and Mindy have softer sides. So we get a little bit of that. The momentary Bickley-Susan flirtation was a little odd, but then soon he just gets annoyed with her, as he seems to be annoyed with most people. I like that we got another of his greeting cards, and we even get to see the artwork of the bunnies, which tied in with him drawing bunnies on his previous episode. No Cora, as I said. Definitely no Eugene. I don't think he would have fit in very well with this episode, with its satire of Est and other psychobabble and self-development trends of the 1970s. Although it's not a mature episode, it just feels more kind of adult humor side in that sense, that kids and psychology, it doesn't really mix well. You know, the little bit of Orson at the end. To some extent, Orson has just sort of turned into this, oh, tell me more about this. And it's like Orson doesn't seem to have any memory of any previous conversation with Mork or any research he's done on his own, like the thing about marriage previously. And here, the way he talks about emotions feels off. Sort of a sounding board. I did think it was interesting that Mindy wants to go to him directly and Mork is preventing that. Like Mork, she uses fat as an insult, although combining with fascist was surprising. But she is very angry, and Mindy has her self-righteous moments, of course. This would have been a 2.5, but as with the previous episode, the Mork and Mindy emotional core bumps it up half a notch. I think there's some lovely, just really nice acting from Pam Dawber. The pain that Mindy would feel losing Mork at this point. And there's been a bit of this in previous episodes where Mork's presence in her life has been threatened. But here, they did the twist that it's his own decision to remove himself. And it turns out he says he's protecting her, but he's really protecting himself. He is still having that conflict of coming from a society, a world that is anti-emotion, living with Mindy and sharing her world and meeting people. He's having all these emotions, and it's almost like somebody from a strict religious background suddenly going into an environment where they can cut loose and not being able to handle that and being pulled in different directions. So obviously some nice acting from Robin Williams. Again, their teamwork of Williams and Dawber gets really strong. I can definitely see progress. There was chemistry in the early episodes this season, but by this point, they are totally plausible as their characters, as implausible as a spaceman is in the abstract. We believe in Mork. And we believe in Mork and Mindy. We believe in them as a team, as best friends, as people who have changed each other's lives. We again get Mork saying that maybe Mindy would be better off without him, and she again emphatically says, no, I want you in my life. And she doesn't say this directly, but he is the best thing in her life, the most exciting thing. So on the egg scale, which measures how well this fits what I'm looking for in a Mork and Mindy episode, because of the unevenness, I would have gone with a 2.5, but I'm going with a 3. And that brings us to the heart scale, which is also 0 to 4. And that measures the romantic viability of a Mork and Mindy ship. This is a pretty shippy episode. And again, as with the previous episode, you could say, oh, they're just really platonically close. But what brings Mork back into the world of wanting to explore emotions and to have his own emotions, not just observe, is a kiss from Mindy. And it just knocks his socks off. And even though it's not his first kiss, it still gets to him. And she chooses to do that. And maybe it's meant to be a goodbye kiss, but I think it's also an awareness that she has this power over him in a benign way. And this connection, she's going to get him to stay. It works. And there's also just the little moments of touching and intimacy. Even before she realizes what he's up to, there's that undercurrent. He says, oh, I'm the Charles Bronson and I don't have emotions. The way Robin Williams plays it, we know he is feeling a lot and not able to fully process it. On Young Love, I talked about how Eugene, being a 10-year-old, couldn't really deal with the emotions that he was having, and Mork has a certain immaturity, or at least inexperience with emotion, and so he goes through that every week, in a sense, but particularly this episode. And a lot of these emotions are rooted in the developing love between Mork and Mindy. I still don't feel like we're going to hit a 3 this season, but I think it is a 2.5 on the heart scale because it's very rich and is definitely not platonic. but I don't want to say just friends, because when Mindy says Mork is just about her best friend, I think it's not so much that she's saying that he isn't her best friend. It's like he's something beyond a best friend almost. He's something, she obviously has other friends, particularly female friends. And Susan is still somewhat of a frenemy, although drifting more to friendship, although not real friends. Before I finish up about the shippiness, I should mention that I really enjoyed Morgan Fairchild this season. Although she's in only 3 episodes, she is really vivid, and they could have done more with the character. But at the same time, I can see why they phased her out. There's probably a limit to what she could be used for. I thought it was interesting to put this other side of her. She basically joins a cult, but she does it in a very Susan kind of way. And so I thought that was nice. And the thing about how learning to love herself means something different than it would for most people, how that fits in with her narcissism. Mork and Mindy, meanwhile, are learning to accept that they love each other and figuring out what that means, and they don't want to be separated. And it's not just for the sake of, well, if Mork left the planet, there goes the show. I mean, the thing of 10 years obviously was optimistic, although there were sitcoms that lasted about 10 years. MASH and All in the Family / Archie Bunker's Place being the 2 that come to mind that were overlapping with Mork and Mindy. So obviously for the sake of the show, Mork has to stick around, but also for the sake of Mindy and for the sake of himself, he has to stick around. We're over 2/3 through the first season. There's still some other things that are going to happen before everything changes. But meanwhile, this episode is 3 eggs, 2.5 hearts. This has been Paula Schaffner with episode 17, Mork Goes Irk. Nanu, Nanu.
You're working on are you working on another film now?
Well, I just finished this movie where I played a 65-year-old woman.
Oh, you did not.
Okay.
I'm kidding. A 65-year-old
Yeah,
woman.
it's about a guy who has to dress up as this kind of English-Scottish housekeeper so he can see his kids. It's kind of like the Trojan housekeeper. He's inside, kind of.
Is it a funny? Is it touching? Is
I
it
hope
poignant?
so. If not, people will be going,
Where
all that makeup for nothing.
where did they make the film?
I made it in San Francisco. It was
Yeah.
great because I was home and I got to work there, which is, so nice to finish. And it was very strange because my son would come see me dressed as a 65-year-old woman. It's very bizarre to have your kid go,
No.
I talked to him today. I called, he's 1.5, and I was saying, Cody, hi, it's Daddy.
Daddy, hi.
Cody, I love you.
Whatever.
I guess I have Kathy Lee's kid. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Please don't upset Frank. Whatever you do.
Oh, no.
Don't upset Frank.
Hi, Robin. Nice to see you. Great that our kids have the same name.
So you're on the streets dressed as a woman walking
Yeah,
around?
I wish I had a picture to show you. It's quite astonishing. It's
Never occurred to you to bring a picture? This ain't exactly radio, son.
Oh, no. Look, Marcel Marceau on CBS Radio. Do radio ventriloquism. There's a great job. Hey, how are you, Charlie? Nice to have you on the show. Well, good to be on the show, Edgar. It's radio. They don't know. I thought I had a picture. Did they bring it?
Oh, that's all right. Yeah.
I don't have a clip. I've got nothing. I've been in Italy going, hey,
No,
David
no,
Letterman,
fine.
che fa? Those of you who understood it went, wow, reality, what a concept.